Okay, so don't say anything now that you wouldn't want anyone to hear, because we're now live. I'm only kidding. Okay, so we're going to start. Actually, we're going to start now. Okay, so welcome everybody. Thank you for coming. This is our first in our series of webinars, and I recognize it's the first one, so as a result, you know, we probably will take a little bit of extra time going over the tech stuff. For anybody who misses this, or if you have to get called away, no sweat. I'm recording it. I'm going to upload it and send you all, Dave will send you a link, which will also be available to you as a resource in the future if you have any new that you want to train, or if you feel you want to use it for some other purpose. So that's me. I'm Jeff Olafson from Staff Development Associates. Many of you have met me before, so I'm not going to spend any time on that. Let me just go over the tech with you. I recognize that some of you are in groups. I'm probably going to end up, even though it's fairly quiet, I may or may not mute, but just in case I do, I want to just go over how you use the chat box. If you're in a group, all you just need is one person near the computer who can respond for the group. That's generally what we do when we do other situations where we have groups. So I just want to go over the details of how you do that if you haven't figured it out already. So up on the top of your screen, by the way, these are just pictures because I can't see your controls and you really can't see mine. So on the top of your screen, you're going to see some icons. One of them looks like a cartoon bubble. You wanted to press that, and you're going to get a box. And the box is going to look something like this. It may be a little bit different depending on what computer you're coming in on, slightly different. But basically, you should be able to see what everybody writes, and where you put your name is here. So partly for attendance, and so everybody can kind of know who's participating. If you can just right now, one person in your group, just type in the chat your name or your district name, and if you're a group, you can just say folks from. Okay, so why don't you do that now?
Thank you.
And the line's still open, so if anybody has a question on how to do that, I can help you with it. Good. I got one response. Good. Okay. Good. So again, since the line's open, anybody not sure how to do that? Is it clear to everybody? I mean, you don't have to answer, but at least I know you know how to do it. Okay, good. Everybody? Good. Okay, it looks like most it out. Good. So it's just kind of been my, how should we say, when I do these webinars to always, yeah, just for noise reasons, I'll mute for now, but it's kind of always been my tradition to throw in a quiz question. It's kind of another chance to use the chat box, make sure everybody knows how to use it. So I decided I would try to pick questions involving custodians and popular culture. So our first question is this. I think it's a fairly easy one. But anyway, Matt Damon plays a custodian at MIT in this 1997 movie. So if you think you know the answer, type it in the chat box. All right, so it looks like you all got it right. And the answer is Good Will Hunting. There we go, by Matt Damon. Okay. So let's get started with our topic. So I know some of you have taken some workshops with me, and obviously our topic is really about relations with other people, how to create the best possible image for yourself individually and for your department. And I don't think I really need to explain why that would be a benefit to you. But one of the things that's almost become a perennial thing for me, or a new thing with all of my workshops, hold on, we just had a person dial in, but is to pose this question to buildings and ground staff: what's your job? And it's interesting the responses I get when I ask that question. So I kind of run you through how it rolls. So normally the first response I get is, well, I'm a custodian, or I'm a maintenance person. And my response usually to that is, no, that's your title. What's your job? And then probably the second, level after that I'll get is, well, my job is to clean the school. And my response to that is, no, that's how you do your job. The question is, what is your job? And that's when we really begin to dig in to what are really the essential elements of the job. And, again, in the interest of time, if this was a long session on site, I might tease it out with a group. But generally, I believe it's, and by the way, if you think I'm missing anything, it's fine. But I would say it's probably a function of three basic things. So the first one I would say is creating a safe, secure, and positive environment for students. That's one. Okay? The second one I would say is, I don't know why I'm getting background noise, but that's weird. But anyway, yeah, get it. So much for tech. But anyway, so create a safe and secure environment for students. Second one I would say is protect the investment the district has made in its facilities. And the third I would say is play a really critical functional role in the safety, the whole safety connection. But probably if I had to look at a fourth one, I would say it's probably being a good ambassador for the district, because in many cases, especially with community use, you're kind of in a frontline role in being the first point of contact. I can tell you when people get lost around a campus, probably the most likely person they're going to encounter who's going to help them is going to be somebody from the Buildings and Grounds Department. So I'll kind of pose this as a question of somebody. How many of you say that's a pretty good list of what the job is in terms of the what your job is? Would you say that's good, not good? Anyone? That's how I tell if you're alive, too. So it's always been my premise that, your job is not easy. And not only is it not easy because the work is hard, but I also think it's not easy because the nature of administrative work in general. And one of the things I'll say about administrative work is when things are working, people hardly notice it. So I often use this example even with other groups. I'll refer to Buildings and Grounds, and I'll say for a group, for example, for a group of office staff, I'll say, let's take a case in point for where we are right now. We're in this room right now. The lights are working. The temperature is correct. The floors are clean. Nobody thinks to turn around to go to the custodian in the building and say, hey, what a great job you did making this room nice today. You're more likely to just go on and take it for granted. Now, on the other hand, if you get there and it's freezing, or if the light's not working, or if it's cold, or there's not enough chairs, who are you going to come running for? So it's almost a natural tendency for people to not notice your work when you do it well, and which means it's not always, you don't always get as many pats on the back as you'd like. By the way, it's always been my argument, really, if you're going to get a pat on the back, you're going to get it from each other. Because unless someone really does what you do, they don't really understand how hard it is. So we need to do more compliment each other for good work, because we're not likely to get it from our customers. What we're going to get from our customers is a complaint about what's not working. So I would say that's just, how many of you would agree with that, by the way? And that's almost the nature of anything involving, Dave, anything involving any kind of an operation. People are just not going to notice it when it's working well. And then there's a kind of second challenge, and that is way too many people think they do what you do. Because they think that, like, cleaning their house on the weekend is the same thing as cleaning a school. And I often give this as an example. I'll say, I'm sitting around on the weekend, I'm working on trying to clean my bathroom. Where I live up in Orange County, we have well water, so we tend to get a lot of rust. So I have to work a little hard and use some big bad chemicals. And so let's say I'm in the middle of the work, and all of a sudden the phone rings. I can stop what I'm doing and take the phone call for as long as I want and just return back to the work whenever I want. But you really can't do that in a school. And so I think there's a really misconnect on the part of people who are not knowledgeable in an understanding that you manage your time. Okay. And that you can't simply drop what you're doing to go help them take things to their car or find things. And I think this is often a cause of frustration. It's a misunderstanding on the part of the people we support about the nature of the job, because they think they... How many of you would agree with... Yeah. The misconception about us managing our time.
The kitchen cabinet.
Yeah.
How far are we going here? What kind?
Well, just the...
somebody has got to stop speaking. I don't... I'm muted. I'm going to try doing this again. Hold on. Okay, I'm going to try muting again. Everybody should be muted. That's weird. Okay, we'll try again, see why we're getting somebody in the background. But anyway, we'll try again. You never know with tech. But anyway, the other problem I think that you face in your work is that, okay, right, maybe, yeah. So anyway, and it's possible, and they signed in late and it didn't mute them up, yeah. So anyway, I just did a mute and unmute. Hopefully that'll work it out. But anyway, much of the work you do is unseen by customers. And that's another challenge, too, because they may not appreciate how much of your time is really being consumed in things that are just not, below the surface. And again, so you're not likely to get credit for them. So one of the concepts that I've been spending a lot of time with folks on is this notion of on-stage and off-stage. And the idea that so much of your work is really done in a fishbowl. And just to be mindful about that. And so I want to talk for a moment about this idea of the Disney concept. I probably should have had this slide first. So have any of you ever been to Disney World in Florida? Anybody? Okay, so how would you say their operation is? Pretty good? Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about their philosophy, not just their philosophy, but also their management approach, okay? So here's the first thing that Disney does. They tell their employees that you are cast members in the show, and that we are in the business of show business. And so they all, now, and actually to be technically accurate, not everybody is a cast member. If you actually never go into the park, you're not considered to be a cast member. So, for example, because of the water tables in Florida, you can't have basements. So, Dave, if you've gone behind the scenes, you know this, that the operations are actually at ground level and the park is on the second floor. Okay? So everything from operations, costumes, HR, even the folks where all the animatronics are managed, that's all like at ground level. So if you never go into the park, so for example, let's say you're a network administrator who works behind the scenes downstairs, or a costumer, or you work in the HR department, technically you're not a cast member. But anybody that goes into the park while the park is open is considered to be a cast member. So obviously you think of obvious cast members, people in costumes, people running rides, but actually everybody in the park is considered a cast member, and that includes the folks that clean the park while the park is open. They obviously have a crew that comes in when the park is closed, but also people that drive the tram, that cook food in the restaurants, that serve food in restaurants, pretty much anybody, cashiers that collect money, anybody that has contact with customers is considered a cast member. And one of the things that Disney tries to instill in staff is this notion of on-stage and off-stage behavior. So, for example, if you are off-stage, let's say you're on your break and you are downstairs in one of the lounges, you can certainly put your foot up on a chair and say, crap, I hate this Florida weather, and I only have 5 more years to retire. I wouldn't suggest saying too many things negative about management. They're not a union shop. But, you can pretty much be, yourself and a person, But as soon as you come into the park and they have these little hidden doors, then the idea is picture perfect. Happy, happy, joy, joy. And while I recognize that that's a high standard, I think if we're going to put our best foot forward, we need to instill in our staff and in ourselves this notion of on stage and off stage, that there are lots of things that we may do that are fine to do, but they shouldn't be done on stage. So, of course, this is an extreme example, and I would hope that nobody would do this, but you know what they say about Murphy's Law, okay? So you have this hypothetical, and obviously, for example, if you have a custodial staff member, they're certainly entitled to a break, in fact, legally entitled, and it's a reasonable thing that they should have a break, okay? And let's say that somebody's on a break, and they're standing in front of the building reading a newspaper, okay, on their break. Now, are you allowed to read a newspaper on your break? Absolutely. It's a break, okay? But they're standing in front of the building and doing this. And as what I would say with Murphy's Law is, if you do that, there's a good probability that that's just the time when the board president is going to be driving by or walking by. And they're going to see you reading the paper. They're going to see somebody in Buildings and Grounds reading the paper. And A, they're not going to ask if the person's on the break. They're going to get an impression in their mind about that, okay, that folks are hanging around reading the paper. And what's going to happen is that's going to hurt us later, because you're going to have a director of facilities that's going to come in 3 months later before the board and say, I need some additional funding for overtime or support for overtime because we're working on a project. And you're going to get somebody on the board who's going to say, you guys don't need it. We know all of the staff, or a lot of the staff, are hanging around reading the paper all day. Now, first of all, they didn't see a lot of the staff duties, or one person doing it, but people have a tendency to globalize. And I have to tell you, just based on my own experience, people tend to believe what they've seen over what they see on paper as data. They tend to believe their eyes over data. So I can have somebody providing very detailed reports on work that we're doing, and yet if they have had a situation where they experience people in Buildings and Grounds reading the paper, they're more likely to rely on what they saw than what they were provided. How many of you would agree with me on that? That there's a heavy influence for what you observed, even if what you observed was an unfair snapshot. Yes? No? So it's really interesting. I was doing this in a district, and one of the facilities directors shared something with me. He was kind of backing me up. And he told me the story. He says one day the ground staff, it was the summertime, and I guess one of the grounds people didn't drink enough water, so he got a little dizzy in the heat, and he sat down. Okay, and somebody else was sat there to help him. Okay, and would you know, the director got a call from a couple of people in the public saying that the grounds folks are hanging around. They're sitting around. So, by the way, I'm not saying he made the wrong decision to sit down. I'm just trying to point out what a fishbowl you're in. And the idea that everybody is watching. And it's not just the folks on the outside that are watching. You also have staff within the district who are watching, and that can hurt you too. Because all of a sudden you can have a situation where a district is thinking about cutting staff, not in your department, and that person's going to say, hey, why are you cutting us and not those folks? They're hanging around, sitting around. So when I say we need to make sure that we're on stage and off stage, it's really important that understanding really applies to anybody outside of buildings and grounds. I'm not saying within our own crews and stuff, but when we're around teachers, that's on stage, okay? Not just when we're around the public. So I realize that's a very high standard, and maybe it's naive to believe we can always do it, but I think the more mindful we are about how important this is, the more likely we're going to create a positive perception. And I've said to some staff, you're cutting your director off at the legs when you're not thinking about this kind of stuff, because you have directors going and fighting the good fight to try to make sure that we're getting adequate funding, consistent funding for facilities, and we've got these anecdotal situations that work against us. So do the best you can. Be a little bit mindful of how you're being seen. And along the same lines, and we've probably heard this quote used a lot of different ways, but like, for example, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, or to use a movie example, The Green Mile, they said what happens on the mile stays on the mile. Well, I also believe that this needs to apply to buildings and grounds. What happens in the facilities department needs to stay in the facilities department. And there's way too many things that people chat up, complaints they have with other people, issues with each other, that get heard by principals, they get heard by teachers, and that harms us. We got to keep it in-house. How many of you would agree with that? Okay? And so there may come a time when you actually have to say to somebody and stuff, look, I don't have a problem with that opinion, but the fact that that's now, it's been like circulated out to everybody in the district, that's a problem for us. And it's going to hurt you. And here's why. Like it or not, fair or not, we sink or swim together. While individually we know about what everybody's individual efforts are, once you get beyond the walls of your department, nobody knows or cares. As far as they're concerned, if one person messes up, the whole department messes up. And they don't make any distinction between maintenance and custodial. They don't quite understand it, and so if something goes wrong, all they know is it's wrong. And so, again, I want to introduce a really important concept that I think, and again, maybe some of this stuff is obvious, and it may very well be, but I think it's important to just keep this front and center and remind people that what you do is hurt yourself when you do these things. So I love this. I actually got this from it was a quote I heard from somebody I know who's an assistant superintendent in Westchester, and she wasn't talking about facilities. She was talking about other people in the district, but it just rang true to me. What she said was the following. She said, listen, one of the rules we have to have in our division is we don't put a white hat on ourselves by putting a black hat on somebody else in our department. So you don't say it wasn't my fault, it was him. Now, I won't get into the issue of whether you should do it with people outside the department, but certainly as a guiding principle, we don't do this with each other. We don't make ourselves look good by making someone else within our department look bad. Would you all agree to that? As a principle. So saying something like, it wasn't me, Or I wasn't the one, he did it, not going to fly. What you have to do is try to focus instead when someone makes a complaint on solving the complaint as opposed to trying to deflect the blame to someone else. Absolutely. And if you think about it, the topic's supposed to be putting your best foot forward, but obviously this could also be about team building. But fundamentally, it's about all of us being mindful of this notion that we sink and swim together. That at the end of the day, you really can't look good by making the other person on your shift look bad. It doesn't work. All it'll happen is the people who have issues with you will use that as a weapon. So we need to just remember, like it or not, you may not love the people you work with, but at the end of the day, you're kind of like in a leaky boat, and because the nature of the work is it's always a challenge, and if you're arguing over whose turn to bail it was or whose fault it was to bail, you're just going to sink together. So I would agree with you, Eric. You just need to stick together, and people need to understand that that's the best survival mechanism. It isn't a question of right or wrong or fairness. It's just the only practical strategy that's going to get us a positive image and help us fight the challenges you have to fight. So along the same lines, I think we have to just take the view, that any messy issues we might have with each other, which, by the way, often are quite legitimate. I am not suggesting that people simply, if they have issues, just put a smile on it and sing Kumbaya. That's usually not a good strategy. That undermines the situation. So we do need to fight it out and have our disagreements, but we need to make sure that we do them out of the view and having no impact on, in particular on students, but I would say on stakeholders. So the hypothetical I always go about this is, somebody sees a spill, it's not in their area, and they don't clean it up because they're ticked off because they believe that the person whose area it was is just somebody who doesn't do their job, So I say, hey, he didn't do her job, he didn't do his job, or she didn't do the job, so I'm not going to do it. The problem with that, unfortunately, is that has an impact on the student. And in the end of the day, they're not going to say, well, it was the guy that was responsible for the first floor that did this. They're going to say, you people messed up. So what we have to do is we have to clean it up because we have to put the needs of kids first. And then there's nothing wrong with at some point in a team meeting saying, I think I have some issues. Why am I constantly having to clean up stuff going on in someone else's area? So I'm not saying ignore the issue. I'm saying don't we have to have a guiding rule. We don't do anything that's going to create a negative impression of the department because we have some resentment over issues with each other. We make sure that our image is clean, we serve our students, and then we have our argument behind the scenes. Would you all agree with that? And again, I think that's another one of those as a leader. And obviously this is a leadership seminar. It's for head custodians, not for rank and file staff. As a leader, I think that's just an important value to, again, put on to staff. I don't have a problem with you having an issue over who does what. I have a problem with you seeing a situation with a danger with kids and not dealing with it. So deal with it and then bring it to my attention, okay? Don't victimize our stakeholders because you have issues with each other, okay? And obviously that's important as well. We need to lead by example and provide a tone with this. If we're talking in front of other people, that's not going to help either. Right. So I like to put it this way. If you think about it like the weather, we've been having some pretty rough weather. I say, what's the forecast in the department from the point of view of our customers? And the answer is always sunny. It's always sunny. Everybody is always pleasant. We're always consistent. We're always predictable. We're always emotionally steady. And what does emotionally steady mean? It means that we're nice on Monday morning at 8 o'clock and we're nice on Friday at 2:30. That it doesn't matter what's going on in our department. we put a good face on it, and and we have a consistent view. Now, what goes on behind the scenes, that's another matter. If you want to feel frustrated, you want to, that's fine. We need ways of communicating that. But from the point of view of our customers, it's always sunny. And so being consistent is important. Would you agree? Consistency and being emotionally steady is important, at least in perception. So along the same lines, and this is just a kind of another angle on the same thing about putting our best foot forward. What I can say is, in spite of the fact that the economy is improving, and that's certainly a good thing, okay? Because of the pressures that come from the cap, and who knows what's going to happen now with this issue with caps on state, on the deductibility of state and local taxes. We're not sure what's going to really happen with that. But even in the absence of that, we're no longer in an environment where even when the economy is up, money is just flowing like water. There is a lot of pressure to make sure that we're accounting for time and money. And I'm gonna tell it like it is, because it's, by the way, it's not just true for you. I'm currently doing a study in Connecticut, and we had this conversation about the central administration as well, okay? And that is certain positions, certain things have a natural constituency. So let's take a hypothetical. If a district announces that they're going to cut an elementary school teacher, in many of our districts in Westchester and Putnam, we get a crowd coming out to complain about that. But you say that you're going to be cutting a custodian, it's going to be a very lonely night. Nobody's going to come out. Now, it's not that people don't want clean buildings. They do. In fact, in some of the work I did on Long Island where we did surveys in the public, I did one study. One of the things that came out really a lot in the study was aesthetics of the buildings. And, and making, in fact, you may laugh at this, but I did a study in a district. We actually did focus groups. And one of the issues that came up, and this is one of those suburban-urban districts, I call it a wannabe district, one of the biggest things that came up was the reliability of toilet paper, that when they reached for it, they didn't have to wonder if it would be there. So I don't want to suggest that people don't care about the work you do. I'm not so sure, though, they make the same direct line of connection between the work and how it gets done and how many people do it. It's just they just want it to be there. Whereas they can see a much more direct connection, say, with an elementary school teacher where it's going to affect class sizes, So would you agree with that? Okay? So because of that, I think you're always you're always a little behind the eight ball, and we have to be mindful of this notion of accounting for time, okay, and perception of that. And so, again, along the same lines with, putting your best foot forward, image, on stage or off stage, you can never really afford to not look busy. And I have situations where people are very good workers, but they often do missteps on this. They're standing in the hallway watching with their arms folded, and they may be watching with their arms folded because they're about to go, for example, handle, I'm talking more day, okay? But they're about to handle, cleanup from the cafeteria, from lunchroom. And so they're just kind of waiting a few seconds, and yet the perception of that, maybe they're hanging around and doing nothing. So I think it's important to always look busy. Especially when you're out in what we'll call on-stage areas. Now, if you're not in an on-stage area, that's another matter. And obviously, if you're in a building doing second shift, past the point where parents are there and community use, you're probably not as much under the gun. Although I will tell you, times are changing, and maybe we need to impress on our staff, there are now cameras all over schools. And if you haven't heard it for those of you who are directors, from superintendents or SBOs, I certainly have heard it from some of them when I'm about to go train, that they're telling me they're looking at their cameras and they're seeing staff watching TV at night. and whereas before nobody would have seen this, they're now able to see it because there are cameras all over the building. Okay, and many of the superintendents are able to access their cameras from their homes. Okay, you know, now if you don't mind me telling just a little aside on this about how the walls have ears. Okay, I'll tell you, I was in Monroe Woodbury in Orange County, actually working with the security team. And after my training, they had mentioned that they had made a major investment in cameras in the building. Okay, and so after my training, they brought me back to the office, and this was probably around 3:15 in the afternoon. So we were into second shift for custodial. Okay, and they were kind of winding up their shift. We were in the office, and they were showing me all the cameras and some of the crazy cool things they could do, like zoom into a license plate at the end of the parking lot. Really pretty amazing. But as we were going along, I'm looking at the cameras. There's one camera that's on the second floor, and I'm looking at this custodian. Okay, and I'm just blown away. She's actually, I've never seen anybody work so hard, particularly at the beginning of her shift, and she's dusting the top of the lockers, and she's doing stuff. And so I just made a comment to the security folks, wow, who's that? She's really good. And they go, that's Rosie. She is awesome. The rest of the shift, they're a bunch of losers. This was the security staff saying this, not me. So all I'm trying to do is point out that, you are being seen. And to just be mindful of that, more so than would have been the case a few years ago, or certainly 5 or 10 years ago, before we had such, so many cameras in so many places. But I will tell you, people look, superintendents look more than anybody else. A lot of times the SBOs don't look, but the superintendents do scan the cameras at night. Some of them scan to see who's coming to the community meetings, but they also do scan. So what does it really mean? Let me stop. Any questions, comments, political statements? How many of you would agree with the things I'm talking about here? Now, and I just want to be clear. It's not like I'm telling you anything, and I say this over and over again. So many of the things I talk about, it's not like these are incredibly new revelations. For folks, I just think it's important that as leaders, we keep putting these things front and center, because I think the further away you get from it, the more sloppy you get about it. And so just like a coach has to kind of coach their team a little bit and remind them about what they need to focus on, I think as a leader, if you are, fairly regularly reminding people of the need to focus on perception, I think you're going to get a staff that's going to embrace this more than when you're only doing it in reaction to a criticism, where we've now gotten a complaint and now you're bringing everybody in, because then it feels like a beat up. And what I'm hoping is we can just constantly remind people this is in our best interest. Think about the idea, think about perception, think about how you look all the time, And along the lines of that, think about what it really means to give good service. And here again, just as a tip with folks, just as I had done with what is your job, a very frequent way that I will approach supervision in the area of customer service is to ask people to think about a situation where they got good service from anybody. Just think about what it was and what did it really look like. And we'll spend some time having them just talk about what it is. And once we get some agreement on what those kinds of things are, then I really lower the boom with the real question, okay, which is based on those standards, how would we rate ourselves? In other words, you've said this is examples of good service. Do we really do it? Do we really meet those standards? And if we don't, Why not? Is it because it's the nature of beast we can't? Is it because we're not being attentive to this enough? To what extent can we control this? But it starts with really understanding what good service is, because it's more than just being polite, And so I want to just kind of share with you what are the elements of good service, because you have to think of them like working the levers of a machine. They're like parts of the machine, of good service. So one of them I would certainly say is professionalism, and that's anything that just creates the perception that we have our act together. So obviously professionalism varies depending on what profession you're in. So no one expects a custodian to look like an accountant, or to behave in a way that would be consistent with the way an accountant might behave or a way a nurse behaves, or gets perceived. It's professionalism and related to your field. And I'll kind of dig down on that in a little bit more in a minute. The second one is accuracy. And I use the word accuracy because I've often asked this question. I'll pose it to you. Is giving people what they want good service? Yes or no? If you think giving people what they want is good service, say yes. Well, I'll put it the other way. Do you have to give people what they want to give good service? Absolutely. If the standard was giving people what they want was good service, that would put you between a rock and a hard place. Because many of the things people want are things that are illegal, dangerous, not allowed by policy. So if the standard for you was making everybody happy or giving them what they want, that would set you up between a rock and a hard place. So I always say good service is not necessarily giving people what they want, it's giving them accurate answers. So if I'm going to tell somebody this is something we can't do, it's because we're not allowed to do it, So I provide accurate answers, because there's nothing that, by the way, that alienates people more than being told, oh, I'm sorry, it's against policy, we can't be done, and then they find out, well, the person was just making it up. They just didn't want to do it. So that's what I mean by accuracy. And by the way, when in doubt, I always tell people don't make an emphatic statement to the effect that we can't do it. Because I've had situations where people go, can't do it, not allowed, and then they find out it's being done everywhere else and in 5 other districts, and then you get slammed big time. So I always prefer saying something like, my understanding is we can't do it. Let me check in on it for you. So at least that gives me a little wiggle room if it turns out, well, I wasn't completely correct. One of the biggest challenges in this area, and I'm just pointing out a problem I don't have a solution to, is sometimes we'll turn around and tell people they can't do something or we're not allowed to do something, and they'll find out it's being done in 2 other districts because the other districts are breaking the rules. We're doing the correct thing. So that, again, kind of puts you between a rock and a hard place, because then you have to explain in a way that doesn't criticize other people, hey, what they do in that other district, they may not be following the rules. And also policies can be different from different places. But I tell people, accuracy is important. If we're going to say no, let's make sure that it's a no. And then the third one is responsiveness. So what's responsiveness? That's anything that we can do that shortens the length of time between the point where people put in an inquiry and they get an answer, even if that answer is no. Okay? And again, this probably deals more with, I don't know if we have any maintenance supervisory staff with us, but this is really critical for me in maintenance. It's not, responsiveness doesn't always mean that I'm going to do things immediately. It may mean I'm going to contact someone to let them know I got it and that it's going to take 2 weeks. But at least I got back to them quickly. So I'll just give you an example in my line of work. So I have some situations where I need to speak to superintendents, and I'm a trainer. I sometimes do a full day of training. I will get a call from a superintendent's office, and I don't have time to talk to them. But I either call back the office or I text them to tell them that I got their message, can I call them the next day? And I can't tell you how many times they compliment me over the fact that I got back to them quickly, even though I got back to them quickly to tell them I'm not going to do it now. Okay? So I think people make the misconception that they think that responsiveness has to be when I actually get something done. I think it's more when you acknowledge receipt of the request and that you give them an update on when you're going to do it. And so we need to be a little bit better about that in some cases. So those are the elements of professionalism. So again, just to think about for a minute, what, can you think of what would be some examples of reflecting professionalism in a buildings and grounds department? Anyone? Nobody's brave. Or you're pondering, okay? So I'm going to take an. I was wondering, are you all with me? I want to make sure you still hear me. Yes, absolutely. I would agree with that. Okay. So, for example, no one expects you to be dressing in a three-piece suit, but I do expect that people are going to come in wearing clean clothes. Obviously, if I'm doing dirty work, it may not be clean at the time, but I expect them at least start the day in clean clothes. Yeah, and I really do think departments look good when you have a situation like this where everybody's wearing a shirt, that is from the district. We don't have to get crazy with full uniforms, but I do think it creates a nice look when I see that. And I also think it's being just personally well kept. When you've got somebody that looks like they haven't combed their hair or they've rolled out of bed or they haven't shaved in 5 days. Hey, you want to grow a beard, it's fine. You want to not grow a beard, it's fine. You want to look like, you don't shave until Thursday? I'm not so sure that looks so good. So I just think we need to be mindful of that. It's not only, though, about appearance. It's also about demeanor. One thing you can say about every one of these guys is they got a smile on their face. Okay? So I think it's also about what? It's being, having a smile on your face. And yes, it's about communicating professionally, and communicating in a professional manner, being polite. So one of the questions I often pose, and again, I think good questions really drive everything as a supervisor. So asking a good question, for example, like the question is based on the on what we've experienced in service. How do you think we do? That's an example of a question. So here's another question, okay? When someone has a problem or a need, do they look forward to or dread contacting, and I put you here, but contacting us? Do they look forward to or dread contacting us? And why would they feel one way or the other? For example, why would they look forward to contacting us? Anybody? Right. Well, I would actually add one thing. Maybe I'll put a little bit more detail into that, Dave. I would suggest one reason they look forward to contacting us is based on their prior experience. When they came to us, we solved problems for them. We fixed things. Okay? So I think that was it. So in the back of their mind, if they've got their problem and they're calling us, they're already thinking, oh, this is great, they're going to come and help me. Okay? I think, and that's been consistent. And then I think the second of it is that we never gave them a hard time about it. There are some people who do really good work, but they just can't resist the temptation to eat your heart out about it, to let you know how much of an inconvenience it was for them. So you probably all dealt with somebody like this. Like, you have to go to them. They're a gatekeeper, okay? And every time you have to deal with them, it's like they just give you grief, okay? Ugh, I'm so busy. So they make you feel bad for helping them, okay? And then they may even have to contact you, but they're going, oh, crap, I've got to deal with him or her again, okay? So again, because this is a supervisory workshop, and I'm always trying to give you some examples of things that you can take back to your crews, I often ask people to think. By the way, the most common response when I sit down with a staff member about the fact that they're not always, how should we say, the easiest people to deal with, their often response is, I didn't start it. He was rude with me first. He wasn't nice to me, so I pushed back, and so I always like to ask people this question. Were you being a thermostat or a thermometer? Okay, so here's the question. What is the difference between a thermostat and a thermometer in terms of what they do? Okay, so what's the difference between a thermostat and a thermometer? Anyone? Exactly. So the thermometer measures the temperature. So if you think about a person who's a thermometer, if somebody comes on hot to them, they're hot back. They react to the situation, okay? A thermostat does the other. It adjusts. It moderates the temperature. So if it's too cold, it increases the heat to a comfortable level. If it's too hot, it lowers the temperature. And in this case, I think the good metaphor would be the lowering the temperature. So obviously, thermostats have to have thermometers in them because you really can't moderate if you can't measure. But I think it's a real difference, and I've often even asked to a staff member in a situation, in that situation, do you think you reacted like a thermostat or a thermometer? Were you the moderating force? When they were wigging out, were you wigging out back? Because I have to have a higher standard for you. I expect that even if parents are upset or a staff member is upset, we will not be upset. We will be the calming influence. And and I know it's not an easy thing to do, but that's part of being a professional in your role, So, and it goes back to this notion of being steady. But I just think it's helpful to think about these ideas. What were you? And I'm the first one to admit occasionally I was a thermometer. The idea here is not to blame people or to fault someone if they've made a mistake. It's rather to just continue to reflect on it. If I experience that situation next time, what are the things that would have allowed me to be more like a thermostat? So here is good or bad, fair or not, right or not. Customers are going to evaluate you through the lens of their prior experience. So if in the past they dealt with folks, and it may have been even before your time, they dealt with folks that gave them a hard time, or they dealt with folks who were not reliable, they couldn't rely on, they made promises and didn't keep them, then they're going to probably judge us against that standard, and they're almost going to be looking to find fault with what we do. And that's kind of really tough. It takes a while. If people have built up a perception of a department, you can't unwind it in an instant. You can claim you're new and improved, but it's going to take time for people to see that. By the way, I always recommend, if you are, it's important for you to assess this. It's not a question of blame. If I come in as a leader and I now assess that in a number of places around my district, people have this perception that we don't give good service, that we're not responsive. Rather than get into an argument about whether that's true or not, I think it's important to say, that's important information for me to know. Now what do I need to do to, change that perception over time? How do I prove that we're new and improved? By the way, if you are going to, it's obviously we only have a couple of minutes left, but if you are going to have people believe you've changed, they need to see something that changes. So sometimes we'll just change our look or the way we answer the phone or something that just kind of triggers it's a new day. So it's not so much that what we're doing is that important, but it's kind of like people have to be able to see that there's some sort of a change as a result of a new regime, which could be, new supervision in that building. But just be aware, you can be behind the eight ball because of a history that goes back before your time. How many of you would agree with that? So I think, you just do need to start with an honest appraisal. If I know that my customers have a negative perception of our operation, that's good and useful information. I can now try to unwind it and fix it. But if I'm in denial or blaming them, I can't do it. So I really got to be honest about it, okay? And here's, as much as we've talked about how important it is to have image and all of that, just remember, at the end of the day, you got to deliver. I mean, you can do all the courtesy and professionalism you want, but at the end of the day, if things don't work, if the trains don't run on time, courtesy is not going to be a substitute. I think what happens in a lot of cases is people deliver, but they make some tactical missteps on the perception side, so they don't get the credit for what they do. But if I came into an operation and the operation was such that we weren't delivering and we were rude, I'd probably work on the delivery first, because there's no point, okay? And in fact, I had a situation, I won't mention which district, I worked with the district, and they actually, here's what they said about the folks, it was a different department. They said they're so good at apologizing because they have to do it so much. Okay, so they were very courteous, very polite, but they didn't deliver. So we need to make sure we fix whatever is, make sure things are working, and then, along the way work on the issues of courtesy. So again, I'll probably go over just by a couple minutes because we started at 5 after, and I promise from now on we'll try to start on time because we won't need to spend as much time trying to get everybody set up. But anyway, don't share your problems with customers. Nobody wants to know the excuses. Oh, it's the day crew and the night crew, and nobody wants to hear it as far as they're concerned. Focus on solutions, don't focus on causes. Nobody wants to know the cause of why something couldn't get done. Focus on, I'm here now, let's see what we can do to fix the problem. So always focus on the future, not on the past. Also remember, 80% of customer service, courtesy is only about 20% of customer service. Most of it's faulty systems. So, for example, if we're not getting to work orders because we have a disorganized work order system or poor assignment of tasks, being polite about it is not the answer. Most of what the problem is about communication and having good systems and procedures. And the best example of this is some of the issues that come up over who should do what. This has nothing to do with politeness. If we haven't had the kind of communication that clarifies what gets handled by the day crew versus what's going to be handled by the night crew, some things are going to go awry, and we're not going to be providing good service. Apologizing for it isn't going to work. Blaming the other shift isn't going to work. We've got to get in and fix the systems. So we already talked about this. I probably should have put that up. If they have it, just accept it and work from that. Correct misconceptions. So in the interest of time, I'm just going to skip, because I want to do my kind of last thing here. All right? And it'll take a couple of minutes, but basically here are my two probably most critical points. One is bad news travels up, good news does not travel up. That's just a reality, just like in administration. So it's much more likely that people are going to hear people at the higher up levels are going to hear complaints rather than hear commendations. And one of the number one triggers, the key to supervision, is to figure out what are the triggers that get something, bad news to travel up. Okay, and I will tell you the single biggest trigger, and we could probably spend an hour on this alone. What are the triggers? But probably the single biggest trigger is having a promise made and not kept. So if I tell somebody I'm going to do something by a certain date, and that date comes and I don't get back to them to tell them we're running behind, that's a sure bet that's going to get pushed up the line. Okay? So again, that's that's taking on a very cursory level, because we could talk in details about this, but in some of my work, I've been trying to get teams to think about what are the triggers that are going to get a staff member to go to the principal's office or a parent to call up, and then to what extent can we control that? Are some of them just beyond our control? Are some of them things where we might be able to cut it off at the pass and reduce the probability? Because at the end of the day, by the way, bad news could travel up, and then I could fix the problem for the person. They could be happy, and the principal never hears about it. Because they're not going to come back and say, if let's say you told someone I'm going to do something in the morning, they complained to the principal, it didn't get done. In the afternoon you show up, you do a wonderful job. They're not going to call the principal and say, by the way, they came and did a great job. It's just not going to be heard. So that's kind of the first of the overarching advice. The second one, and it's along the same lines, promise less, deliver more. Be conservative about what you can do. You can always please. If you tell somebody, I probably won't get to it till Friday, and you show up Thursday, no one is going to say, you said Friday. On the other hand, if you tell them I'll have it done by Wednesday and you don't get to it till by Friday, they're already complaining about you. So I always use the example of Scotty, because any time that Captain Kirk would ask for more warp power, Scotty would always say, I'm not sure if my engines can do it. He always knew he could do it. He just always believed you should, or you should promise a little less and deliver more, because it makes you a hero. And then the last of the things is, I call it the NOID. And that is, try to avoid using the word no as much as possible. Try not to use the word no. And because, first of all, most of our no's are not no's anyways. They're not nows. But I like to try not to use the word no. I like to do what I call the yes but. Or I'd be glad to do it for you, but. Okay? And so I put together a little animated thing to kind of describe this to you, okay? And so it goes like this, all right? I need you to set up the gym for a meeting in a half an hour. Is it on the schedule? No. I would be glad to do that for you, but anything not on the schedule requires approval from the principal or the head custodian. So notice, in this little scenario, the custodian never used the word no. Never said he wouldn't do it. He said, be glad to do it for you, but you got to get what? Approval. So I try to tell my staff, as much as possible, please don't say no to people. Tell them, I'd be glad to do that for you, but it's against policy. I'd be glad to do that for you, but you need to put in a work order. Always begin what is the no. Now, by the way, you're turning them down, but you never use the word no, or you try not to use the word no. So we're already a little over, and I need to be respectful of your times because you have a lot to do. So maybe we should wrap up. Any last questions or comments? Any thoughts on this? Did you find this medium useful? Doing online, I know for many of you this may have been the first one that we did online, and we'll continue, and we'll try to do more topics. Okay, good. All right, so I will have the recording available, and I'll push it out as a link to Dave, and he'll push it out to all of you. And it'll be on YouTube, unlisted, so it will not be able to be seen by anybody except folks in the association, and since it's yours. But you'll be able to access it easily on any device, okay? That's a good question. I might be able to help you with that a little bit. If you contact me, Eric, I'll send you some stuff. Okay? All right. I'm going to cut off the recording, and have a great day. Dave, if you could send Eric my email address, that would be fine. I don't have yours, Eric. All right. Sounds good.